Hi, I'm going to be interviewing my friend Rebecca McLean. She's one of my dearest friends. She's a semi retired Episcopalian priest, author, educator, and advocate. She's regarded as a pillar in our community, both as a theological authority and a leader by example. I chose her specifically today to talk about gender issues because she spent the bulk of her career in a strongly male dominated field, church clergy people, and so I think she'd have a valuable perspective on gender roles in general. So here she is. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. And you can feel free to look in any direction. You don't have to stare at the camera. So, first, do you think that there are any gender roles in society that people should be taught to follow?
I'm not much on shoulds, so I would say at this point, I don't think there are any shoulds about a gender role.
I understand completely. Do you think that the way a person was raised can affect the way their gender identity develops?
Absolutely. I think when I consider my own children, and there is a temptation when you have a little girl to dress her up, to give her dolls, and to behave in a particular way, even in the way we baby talk. And I think we do influence both girls and boys in the way we talk with them, the way we engage them. The developmental stages within any given spectrum of girls and boys is both similar but also a little different. Girls tend to verbalize a little earlier than boys, and so you find that your communication with little girls often is more direct. There's more, I think there are more visual cues. Little boys, if my son was an example of a typical little boy,
Right.
he was busy and he was often on the run and I was on the chase. And so
Sure.
there is some difference just in their developmental stages that I think means we treat them differently. And so whether we want to or not, there is a bias. And when you have a child, I have a grandson who especially liked his older sister's dress-up clothes.
Oh, sure.
And he loved nothing more than being a princess. And I did, on occasion, watch his father become a bit distressed. So I think there are ways in which we, either consciously or unconsciously, treat gender issues differently.
Oh, sure.
Particularly in small children.
So you would say that language is one of those pivotal changes?
Absolutely.
That makes sense. Do you think that there are some professions that better suit one gender over another?
I wouldn't say that in general. I think it makes any difference in professions. I think we've seen so many barriers fall. Certainly since I was coming of age, there was a kind of expectation that as I went off to college that I would be a teacher or a nurse. And when I signed up as a pre-med student at my university, it was seen as aberrant. So we set a bias for a long time, and within even 4 or 5 years of my graduating, I began to see that change. And at that point, it was never a question about whether a woman could be a lawyer or a doctor or a neurosurgeon or an engineer. That began to shift, and I don't think there's any particular bias. There are some issues that could have impact, but those are mostly about the physicality of a certain position, and my physical stature is an impediment to some things,
Right.
but not my gender.
I see. So it's more about physiology, not socially constructed gender.
Exactly.
I see. That makes sense. In what ways in your life has being a female made life easier for you?
I'm not sure that I would say there are any ways that being female made things particularly easier.
Gotcha.
I don't know that I've experienced that bias. There may be expectations or projections that may have made certain things easier. The expectation or projection as a girl that I was going to behave better, and you kind of rise to the expectation sometimes.
Oh, I see.
So maybe I got away with some things because the expectation that as a girl I wasn't going to cause the same kind of trouble.
And conversely, in those same situations, had you been a man, they might have expected differently, and so ridden you a little harder, or
Exactly.
corrected, or been a little more
Right.
hypercritical.
So
I
there
see.
may be occasions when I can see a girl or a woman getting away with something because there were certain gender projections. But I don't know that I would say that in general it's been easier to be a woman than what I perceive.
Right.
I don't know. Since
I
I've
know, so
only
much of this
been
is
a
about
woman.
perceptions, isn't it? Do you think of any examples that come to mind where you observed maybe some other woman who did get away with something that maybe you thought she shouldn't have because of those expectations? Is that a professional context, or maybe back when you were teaching?
I'm not sure that I could identify a particular situation where I saw a gender bias that favored a woman. I think often we've had to rise.
So the reverse, which leads to the next question, which
Exactly.
is the flip side of that, in which ways in your life has being a female made it harder for you? I'm
And
sure you have lots of stories there.
again, and physiology is part of it. And so I might have a different answer if I had been a 6 foot tall woman, but my size and my gender, I think there is a bias. And as a small woman, I've often felt that the words that come out of your mouth, even though they might be profound and wise, that sometimes there is a temptation to dismiss a woman when the same words come out of the mouth of a man,
Sure.
that they suddenly are seen as wise and profound. And that's a curiosity that I've both experienced and observed more than once. And I think we observed some of that in the political debates this last year, where Hillary Clinton is articulate in expressing her views and opinions, and there is the presence of the other candidate, Donald Trump, using physicality, his body to intimidate. And I think I've experienced that either in the literal sense or metaphorically many times. I've been in board meetings where I might be the only woman who's serving as an executive on a board, and often found that men of a certain age in particular would look to the other executive, the male executive in the room,
I see.
and we would sometimes even play a little game that I would say at first whatever it needed to be said, and it would be dismissed, and then 5 minutes later he would say it, and it was met with great applause.
Of course.
And we played that because I often would have really good ideas, and he would then pick those ideas up, and that's how we got things done.
Wow, so you were forced to surrender credit for being the originator of the
Often.
positive change.
Often. And I think that happens. I think that's happened to a lot of women. We know that in even looking at scientific papers where there has been a lead scientist, often male, and a supporting person, often female, and when the paper is written, the woman's name is not even included, and that happens frequently enough, and has happened in the past so often that we're only now discovering that often research was being done by the woman, conclusions were being drawn by the woman, and the lead voice was given credit.
That's terrible. I think that is actually still happening in research communities today, which is very sad. But
It's
yeah,
very unfortunate.
reading about that.
So I think those challenges exist. It's hard for me to know outside of my own field
Sure.
how extensive that is. I certainly know, and I can share from my son's experience. He's a lawyer. He he grew up with a mother who was in a position of some leadership, and so he was witness to, as in his childhood, to a woman who was doing things that were outside of the norm and exhibiting leadership. And as he began his career in law, his first significant job, he had a woman as a boss, and he found that he loved working with women and
really?
has deep and profound respect for women in the career path.
Oh, sure.
And to see that as a generational shift has been really quite wonderful. And to know his profound respect for women in his field and his actual preference to work with women
Sure.
has been very interesting.
Absolutely.
And fortunately, he is the father of 2 daughters.
So it works out well.
Yeah, it works out well.
And would you say that his experience as a child of watching you behave in non-gender normative power, culture, social, whatever you want to call it, types, was influential in him developing that?
I think so.
That makes sense.
I think between his mother and his grandmother, he had an experience of seeing women who were effective and strong and capable, and that it did have an impact. And that's why I'm very encouraged about what I see among many men today who are my son's age and younger, that there seems to be a very different environment and much more, a better balance.
Good. Glad to hear that. Speaking of, you said your experience in your field, you've worked in a few different fields, so it's not like you've only been in one little house forever. Throughout all those fields, as an employee, have you personally preferred to have men or women as your superiors?
For the most part, I've had men as my superiors. As a teacher, the principal was always a man. And I look at that and the style of leadership that's often exhibited by men who have come up the educational ranks and often come up through the sports arena. So guys who were coaches who ultimately became principals of high schools.
Not necessarily a purely academic linear path.
Correct. And so my experience as a teacher in a secondary field, we always had male principals. When I left that field and went into the church, there were no women in executive or leadership roles, and so that experience has really left me with very few female role models. I've been in a position of leading, but my mentors were all men, and I would say that the experience of having male mentors who valued and appreciated what I brought to the table was an extraordinary and positive experience.
Oh, great.
And so that, I've honestly never been in a position where I've had a woman who was in authority over me.
Wow. So you literally can't say your preference because you've only had experience with one.
I can't say my preference.
Wow.
I don't know.
So on the flip side, I'm certain you've had both men and women work for you.
Absolutely.
What was your preference there for people who answer to you? Would you rather have a man or a woman working for you in any capacity?
I love people who are creative and who are imaginative, and I always had people working for me who were more gifted and talented than I am. So I never cared at all about whether there were women or men. I don't think my own bias was ever played out in the workplace at all. I loved working with talented people and capable people, and the
Do you feel
gender.
that you do have an implicit bias? It's just never surfaced, or you've always been able to control that?
I don't think